The Summer Games Minute, brought to you by Mass Mutual. For most professional athletes, versatility means they can play a few different positions in a single sport. For Babe Dietrichson-Zaharias, versatility means dominance across the entire spectrum of sport. In the 1932 Summer Games in Los Angeles, Zaharias won gold in the 80-meter hurdles and the javelin throw, plus she got a silver in the high jump. Running, throwing, jumping wasn't enough for Babe, so she became a competitive billiards player, then jumped into professional golf, winning 10 major championships, all the while making a few pitching appearances in Major League Baseball spring training games. Mass Mutual understands the nuances in how women want and need to manage their finances. With quality product solutions and guidance, a Mass Mutual financial professional can help you plan for both short-term and long-term money goals. Learn more and get started at massmutual.com.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
Tankinis, bikinis, monokinis. Walmart is the best kept secret for stylish summer swimwear. Make a splash with hot summer essentials like beach bags, sandals, and more. Find your style at Walmart.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and the extraordinary story of Renault's F1 team took another remarkable turn recently with the appointment of Flavio Briatore as executive advisor. But what does his comeback mean, and what does it say about the future and culture of the team? I'm Edd Straw, and joining me for another of our regular visits to the mad world of Alpine F1 are Scott Mitchell-Malm and Damien Smith. Well, welcome back, Damien. Obviously, as this was an Enstone-focused podcast, we had to activate our Alpine bat signal to summon the author of the book, Benetton, Rebels of F1, given your expertise in the team and Flavio Briatore. So are you feeling a bit typecast now?
Just a little. I'm obviously a one-trick pony as far as you're concerned, Ed. I only ever get invited to talk to you when it comes to this subject, but that's fine. I've got to be useful for something, I suppose.
Exactly. And they're a subject that does keep giving, aren't they? So it's certainly always been a story team, so that's no bad thing.
No, it is, as you say, one thing after another with this team, isn't it? Especially at the moment. Yeah,
it's never quiet. That's certainly the case. And Scott Mitchell-Malm, obviously we didn't hear from you over the Spanish Grand Prix weekend, so how's life?
Yep, all good. I was living out your worst nightmare over the Spanish Grand Prix weekend, engaging in some Swedish midsummer activities, which I think is the very concept of that terrifies you, doesn't it, ever since you saw a certain film a few years ago?
Yes, I did indeed see the film, and so I dread to think what's been going on there. So yeah, that slightly compromised my view of it. But you got out alive.
Yeah, only some really low level human sacrificing over the weekend. So pretty good. Ate some herring, met some family, sacrificed some people, just a classic Swedish midsummer.
Excellent. Well, you're continuing to do great work for Swedish tourism there. Right, well, inevitably we're going to start on the question of Briatore returning to the scene of the crime, as it were. Now, we should note that although he was initially found guilty by the FIA World Motorsport Council of conspiring with Pat Symonds and Nelson Piquet Jr. to manipulate the 2008 Singapore Grand Prix. He did successfully challenge the lifetime ban from motorsport in the French courts. Eventually, he and the FIA came to an agreement, although he stated he bears his share of responsibility given his role at Renault at the time. He never accepted the level of responsibility that the FIA initially attributed to him. But however you slice and dice it, he's still one of the key players in what happened in Singapore when Piquet crashed to trigger the safety car that allowed Fernando Alonso to win. So with that brief recap out of the way, where do you stand on his return from this perspective, the fact that he was the man who played a key role in that, going back to the same team?
It's specifically the going back to the same team that's a problem. I don't think anybody could argue against Briatore taking a role in F1, in a team, in any kind of position, really, from a sporting perspective or a business perspective, because we know he's been working with Formula One on some commercial activities. He hasn't stopped being a quite engaged figure behind the scenes, whether that's with driver market shenanigans or whatever. So he's always been and remained very plugged in. And regardless of the specifics of that FIA ban, then the overturning of it, the settlement agreement, what Briatore did and didn't accept responsibility for, to a greater or lesser extent, he served his time. There was a period in which he was banned. There was a period in which he couldn't work. And you can't have a punishment system that then basically by default extends into a permanent life ban anyway, because you're never allowed to rejoin the workforce because you're tainted by what happened before. That I don't think that is what anybody who takes issue with this appointment would argue. I don't think it's reasonable to take that position. But one of the things that jumped out at me when this first happened, and I commented about it on social media, was the number of people who threw back as like, oh, but no one bats an eyelid when Pat Simmons takes job X. And to which I just kept replying, but Pat's not going or gone back to Renault. He's not gone back to where this all happened. And that, to me, is the problem. And I was really surprised that Renault has done it, because as a manufacturer and as an entity involved in Formula One, I struggle to think of another that is so obsessed by optics as Renault is, and yet continues to do the most publicly terrible looking things, whether it was the driver market saga a couple of years ago where it somehow loses Fernando Alonso and Oscar Piastri in one go, whether it's, the drivers driving into each other and having massive fallouts, or whether it's this. They find ways to shoot themselves in the foot, even though they're obsessed with doing things and making sure they do things that make themselves look good. It's quite there's quite an irony there.
Yeah, I sort of lean towards your view of it. I wrote a piece when it was announced saying, what does this say about the sort of culture of Renault, given the scandal it brought on Renault and the damage it did to the team to bring him back. But interestingly, because of course something had happened involving Enstone, I had to drop an email to Damien immediately to make him do his tricks. So you actually had a slightly different view, which I thought would make good material for a podcast.
Well, yes. I mean, firstly, I do think it is fairly astonishing that Renault would even consider rehiring him, given the severity of what he did and the fallout of it. And there's a high level of hypocrisy that they've taken him back after everything that was said and done in the immediate aftermath. Having said that, I don't really see a problem with him going back to, as you put it, the scene of the crime, because any team would benefit from what he brings, I would argue. Putting aside, I too wrote a piece, Ed, for another website, and
more competition.
A bit of a slating from people, because it's fairly binary with this one. A lot of people just see it as he cheated. He was banned for life, despite the fact it was overturned. He should not be allowed back, and that's the end of it. But the reality is, I would say no team on the grid needs someone like Briatore more than Alpine, and it's I don't really see it as, it doesn't trouble me that he's going back to that team. And beyond the point of the question of whether he should be allowed to come back or not, he is allowed to come back, whether we like it or not. There's a team with a very specific need for someone of his skills, and I think it makes a lot of logical sense, actually.
Yeah, certainly, and we'll get on to some of the aspects of the value that he brings, but it's shortly. But it's a really interesting one in terms of the nuance, because obviously, as you said, Scott, people come back with, well, he didn't complain when Pat Symonds got a job, but also, we didn't complain when Flavio Briatore started doing work with Formula One, and he's never really been away. Really, he is involved in all sorts of things. He's involved in everything in motorsport. He knows it inside out. So that in itself hasn't been a problem. But it was very interesting the way they tried to do it, because it's very clearly Luca Di Maio's appointment. He's the Group Renault CEO, and although he was announced as being appointed by him to be his F1 advisor, Bruno Famin, the team principal, did clearly say that, yes, he's an advisor to the whole team as well. I'll be working closely with him. And then in the press conference, when he was asked about it, initially by David Croft from Sky Sports F1 and then by myself, he sort of said, well, we're not worried about the past at all, and we're just worried what he can bring. And that to me is tricky, because I can't imagine that organisation being as generous with anyone else who in the past had worked for that organisation and transgressed in some way. It just seems to me a little bit, well, he's good for us, therefore it doesn't matter what the history is.
It's a little bit selective in terms of what you allow. We know that this is partly how the world works, and it's definitely how F1 works. Is some people are allowed to get away with more than others, and there's a degree there. I was surprised to hear that there were quite a few people kind of just outright defending Briatore as a whole over the weekend. The same kind of senior people in Formula One who often, will preach integrity and say that there's a right way of doing things, which I thought was quite telling, because it's very easy to say that kind of stuff, take that stance when you're talking generics. But when one of your friends is in the firing line, I think the position does change slightly.
Well, you could argue it's a difference between them talking about Christian Horner and talking about Flavio Briatore. Very different situations, but that was a slightly grating thing for me.
Yeah, my issue with it is I don't want it to boil down to as simple as, well, this looks terrible, so therefore they should never have done it, because that is slightly too simplistic. And Damien was saying in his answer about how binary people have made this, but in very different ways, perception is really important. I remember a very different example, but after the 2021 Abu Dhabi finale, I remember writing something about the FIA, because people didn't understand that, for example, with the FIA itself and the International Court of Appeal are completely different bodies. That it's not. But the problem is, it's the ICA is within the FIA, and all of its stuff is done with FIA letterheaded paper and whatnot. So to the outside world, it is the FIA. And my point was, sometimes in certain circumstances, the perception that something is so is as damaging as it being so. And I think it's the case here, because at any other team, I would like to think that if Briatore is there as a in a senior position now, and something controversial happens with that team in a race or whatever, you're inevitably going to get people saying stuff about it. But I'd like to think that he gets given the benefit of the doubt, because you shouldn't be tried twice for that offence.
And no one's ever suggested, when Pat Symonds was involved with Williams, for example, that there was anything like that. That was never that. Well, certainly we didn't. But I don't remember it happening. And that in that scenario, rightly so.
But it's really hard it will be really hard for people to give him the benefit of the doubt if that happens at Renault, because it would just be that pressure. Pressure's bigger, that the magnifying glass is on him with an order of magnitude greater, and I think he just won't get that kind of time, and I don't know the right word for it, but the Symonds example is a good one. Symonds went through, for lack of a better word, a rehabilitation publicly through the eyes of F1 fans and people in the paddock by working his way through different teams in different roles. Briatore hasn't done that, and furthermore, he's come back very publicly in the same place that he was part of this before. And it's not just about, it isn't about whether it's my opinion and whether I think that, the optics are terrible or whatever. It's just, it's a lot to ask of people to look past that and say it doesn't matter because it's what the team needs now performance-wise. And I felt that when I saw that answer from Fanman in the press conference, I thought that was a little bit wash your hands of everything that happened before and pretend it didn't matter, because it absolutely mattered.
Yeah, I've potentially got a bit of sympathy for Fanman because I don't think he did it, and I don't know what he would have done if it was completely his decision. I can't say I know that. So I think the team has been given this by Di Maio, and given somebody who does have abilities, you say, Damien. But obviously, in terms of the ethical argument and all these things, Flav won't care, will he? You know, this won't be something that's on his radar, really.
No, it won't bother him one little bit. He's just not that sort of character. I mean, he's very popular in the paddock. I guess that's what you're referring to in terms of how the response over the weekend. People like him because he's charming, he's very funny, and he's good company. And he is very effective when it comes to negotiating and doing deals. I saw a social media post earlier on from Frank Durney, respected designer and engineer who worked under Briatore at Benetton for a period in the 90s. And he sort of made the point that Briatore added absolutely nothing to the speed of the car and to the function of the team. But that's kind of beside the point. No one ever thought he did they? I think, it's not really what he was there for. But the big thing that comes out of this for me, in a way, is how undermining it is for Famin, who's a hugely experienced engineer and respected technical director and leader, but not in Formula One terms. He's done a lot in Dakar and sports car racing, but he's still relatively new to Formula One. He's been put in a very difficult situation. He's been making some very big calls. They've lost a lot of people, and it's all going horribly wrong. And suddenly, someone from outside with this incredible past has been brought in, apparently to work beside him. If that's correct, it must have been uncomfortable for him at the weekend to be put in that position. So yes, I would agree with you, Ed, that I feel some sympathy for him in the situation he finds himself.
I would love to know exactly how much of what the split is in terms of people who think this is a good idea within Renault itself, and by that I mean not just the Renault group on the board side in France or whatever, but Enstone, for example. I'd love to know that, because there might well be some people who look at it purely, and in fact there will be people who look at it purely from actually, he was really good before. It worked really well when he was that kind of lightning rod for all the nonsense from the board and just let us be a race team. That's what he was. He was, as to your point, Damien, no one thinks that the role that Jean Todt played at Ferrari was designing all those cars. It was about running a team shielded from politics and wider meddling and whatnot, harnessing the resources and then just letting really talented people do their best. But I think you said, Ed, when we were discussing this before it was official, because obviously it was clear for a while that Briatore had this role, but as I think it's become clear, the team was clearly keen to just not really announce it until Renault forced them to announce it, basically.
Yeah, it's Di Maio that seemed to want it announced, from my understanding.
But you said, didn't you, Ed, when we've talked about this before, when we have argued about where the heck what's Renault's strategy for its works team? It doesn't have one, and all of that corporate nonsense. You have said they need someone like Briatore, but you didn't mean actually get Briatore back.
Yeah, I said on this very podcast that's the sort of person they need. I mean, it's interesting because people listening to this will know what we've said about Alpine before, and they might say they don't understand Formula One, etc. Di Maio doesn't, for example, and you could say, well, why are you irritated? This is the sort of person you wanted in there. And in a way, you could say, well, the fact that that Di Maio is willing to put him in this role because he thinks he can do something to help them actually achieve what they should be achieving, and to hell with everything else, is actually a positive, and it shows that they're a bit more serious about it, and that you can make that argument. Certainly, it just seems extraordinary, because I mean, I think back to, obviously it did a lot of damage to the Singapore thing, did a lot of damage to the image of Renault. Renault pulled out of the team as a result, and the team was plunged into all sorts of trouble. Junior Capital owned it,
which it's still suffering from now. Yeah, that's the thing. The stuff that they're bringing Briatore in to dig them out of is the stuff that something he was involved in effectively caused.
Yeah, exactly. And there was obviously people lost jobs and there were people who weren't being paid on time, etc., which does connect to that. So that feels a little bit, that's one of the things that troubles me a little bit, just from a ethical point of view, if you like. But yeah, you could say that that's fine. But from what I hear, the response from the workforce and the team's actually been fairly positive when they were told about it. So that's something. They've been told it's not for sale. He's there to sort it out. So yeah, it could work from that perspective. But
I have a question for you, Ed.
Oh yeah.
This might be testing exactly how much you found out about this over the weekend. But it's a two-part question. The first part is, how many races is he going to do on site this year? And the second part of that is he going to be in Singapore?
I'm sure he might be. The thing is, if he's in Singapore, something funny will happen. Remember I'm sure you remember this, Damien, given your obsession with this team, but because it all got sorted out, or it all came out, and all the trial and everything was just before Singapore 2009, and Flavio and Pat Simmons left the team, and Bob Bell took over as interim technical director, and interim team principal rather. And I always remember Romain Grosjean was driving, and he managed to have a legitimate, not a PK style crash, but he went off in that corner, and then you cut to Bob Bell on the pit wall just laughing. It was in practice. So there's always that little those little jokes of happenstance that happen. I'm sure there'll be something like that. But well, what I do know about Briatore's role is he's not operational. So he's not going to be there sat on the pit wall week in, week out, or at least that's not the intent, and that's not what they're saying it is.
For how long?
Well, yeah. Flavio Briatore is prone to mission creep. Let's put it that way. Damien will know that better than me. So I would be surprised if this wasn't a very Briatore team. And that's why, because, for example, you could argue, it's executive advisor, it's not so heavily plugged in as he was, but he's going to be influential, isn't he, Damien? And I guess that again is the thing that worries. He's not going to do another Singapore. I'm not suggesting that, but again, it's this is such a significant appointment as well, and such a conspicuous appointment. Again, it just makes you wonder.
He's a player, isn't he? That's the thing. And the other thing that strikes me is, in terms of hiring someone with expertise, who has spent years doing deals of the nature that he needs to do. How many people out there are there who they could hire?
Yeah, there's not many.
With direct Formula One experience. It's a bit like in football at the moment. There's a dearth of managerial expertise. When Premier League's looking for a new manager, they're struggling to find someone who can actually take on that job, who knows what they're doing and isn't a risk. And in motor racing and in Formula One, that's definitely the case at the moment, which is partly why Famin got the job he's got, because there was no one obvious to take on his role.
But the way they've done it has always been, like, over the last 2 or 3 years, has been so confusing. insofar as I will inevitably miss out a job role here, so I do apologise. But off the top of my head, I believe that since the Alpine rebrand, which was for the start of 2021, they have a new CEO, they have a new team principal, they have a new technical director, they have a new head of aerodynamics, they have a new sporting director. Every single major position in that team has changed since that rebrand, and that leadership element of it has been, the absolute top level of it has been. I really wish I could swear more on this podcast than I do. It has been an absolute disaster. You've had that ridiculous scenario once Cyril Abiteboul left, where they didn't have a team principal and they claimed that it was all deliberate, but Marcin Barkowski was going around on his LinkedIn page basically claiming he was the de facto team principal and stuff like this. He eventually left, got eased out, whatever it was. Alain Prost left, got eased out, whatever it was. Otmar came in. Otmar was pretty rapidly undermined by Laurent Rossi and eventually sacked himself, but Rossi was also moved aside. And Famin, who kind of... I understand his background and he's got a lot of respect from the places that he's worked previously. But he kind of ended up at Renault heading up Viry. That part of Renault that's underperforming so much that they might actually just scrap their works engine entirely. Having been at the FAA where he was basically in charge of their response to COVID, wasn't he? He oversaw pretty much all of the paperwork around that and getting F1 racing going again. And I don't say that to undermine his credentials. I don't think people understand how big an undertaking that was. But that was his immediate job prior to then running an F1 engine program, which underperformed and has been underwhelming. And from there, he was announced head of the whole project, which included F1. And then he's absorbed the F1 team principal job into that since Otmar left. So they're bringing in Briatore because I think partly to what Damien said about there's no one there, no one really available with that level of experience. But I also think it's just, I don't think they know who they want and what they want in charge of their F1 team. And it feels I do wonder if it's a little bit of someone close to Di Maio, whether it's a Stefano Domenicali or someone like that, a Toto Wolff type, because Wolff has been quite matey with Di Maio at times at F1 races, just saying, why not Flav? Why not this guy? Because there's no strategy behind it. I mean, I get that we're all in slightly different positions from an ethical point of view, but I'm pretty sure we've all stated that we can't believe Renault's done it, regardless of whether it's a good idea or not.
Yeah, it's certainly not something you could have seen coming. Although I stressed, obviously, he's perfectly free to. There's nothing stopping it from happening. It shouldn't. There should be no impediment other than is this a good idea in terms of that history. So
also, as long as that's the other thing. As long as they just accept that, as long as they accept that it looks crap, as long as they accept why it looks as bad as it does, I don't have a problem with it going forward. I'm not going to bang the drum week in, week out saying he shouldn't be there. This is a disgrace.
Well, once
or
it's
anything
happened
like
and it's
that.
there and you said it, it's kind of we write a piece, do a podcast, and then it's there, isn't it? So there is the weathering the storm element. So maybe you never know. Maybe we say that reflects a change in mindset, and they're willing to do something that looks bad, not care about the optics because it can be good, but. Yeah, I think you can look at that in very different ways as well.
You know we love talking stats here at The Athletic. Here's one that's super simple to remember. Discover automatically doubles the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cash Back Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. That's right, you could put it towards some memorabilia you've had your eye on or treat yourself to a premium sports network. You earn and Discover doubles. See terms at discover.com/credit card.
We'll get back to the pod in a moment, but first of all, let me tell you about Grammarly. Email, Google Docs, Slack, you write across multiple platforms and places during your workday, so delivering consistent, high-quality communication everywhere is key. Grammarly is an AI writing partner that helps you get work done faster with high-quality writing for better projects, proposals, presentations, and more. Best of all, Grammarly works where you work, so you can get more done no matter what tools you use. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster. It's got some really cool features like tone suggestions to help you strike the right balance between direct and friendly in work emails. Plus, Grammarly has a ton of other great features like advanced spelling, grammar, punctuation, and conciseness suggestions to ensure your writing is professional, mistake-free, and clear. Get AI writing support that works where you work. Sign up and download for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's GRAMMARLY.com/podcast. Easier said, done.
Tankinis, bikinis, monokinis. Walmart is the best kept secret for stylish summer swimwear. Make a splash with hot summer essentials like beach bags, sandals, and more. Find your style at Walmart.
Right, well, we'll set aside the previous debates on that ethical side and just focus purely on what Briatore can bring to the team. So, Damien, you've touched on this, but what can be expected of him as executive advisor?
Well, he's been brought in to do the big deals, and whether that's on the driver front, engineers, the infrastructure, sponsors, and as Scott alluded to, if they do end up becoming a customer team and buying an engine, doing that deal. Plus, also, the Concord agreement is coming up as well. He's got huge experience dealing with the top end of Formula One in that sense, and the value of teams. So that's where I think it makes a lot of sense to have him on board. And he's very effective at it and has been in the past.
One thing within that I think could make him a brilliant weapon for this team is he's going to be a total wild card in all of these negotiations, not just because of his character and the way he goes about things, his experience. I think he's quite I think he's quite a hard person to try and second guess. Like he there is a reason he has been as prominent and successful as he has been. But I also just think at his age and with he's not bounced from F1 job to F1 job to then end up here. They've called him to do this. He's not really gonna care if not in a nasty way. And Ed, what is the number one rule of negotiating?
What is the number one rule of negotiating? Is this one of the things that I say that you're now throwing back?
Yes,
what do I say? What's this great word of wisdom?
You have to be willing to walk away.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. Good advice from me there.
Yeah, exactly. Well done, past Ed. But and I sincerely think not, and I'm not saying this because I think he's going to be flippant about it or anything like that. But I think in these positions, I can just imagine Briatore being incredibly matter of fact about it, deciding what he thinks is best, presenting that as the option, and basically saying take it or leave it, because it doesn't. What does it hurt him? Whereas I can just see like a little bit of. One of the things I think Renault's been bad at the last few years is pussyfooting about a few things.
Shilly-shallying, that was the word that was used in the contract recognitions board case,
exactly.
Wasn't it?
And I, of all of the things that have been said about Flavio Briatore in his career, has he ever been accused of shilly-shallying?
No. But he's a bit of a cowboy as well, and that's precisely what you need in these situations. I mean, if I can just draw on an example from my book, Benetton Rebels of F1.
Did you write a book about this
write
team?
A book, yeah. But one of the funny stories that I really enjoyed when I was doing the interviews for this, Pat told me this, that when the Mile 7 sponsorship deal was being negotiated, Flav had nothing to do with it. It was they had a head of marketing, a guy called David Warren was there at the time, who did all the lead work on it. But at the end, Mile 7, Japanese company, the way that a Japanese business tends to work is they want to speak to the boss at the end of the day. And for the final meeting, they said to Flavio, "You've got to come to Tokyo." And he said, he didn't want to go. He really didn't want to be there. But they sent him over. The final presentation in the boardroom, Flav apparently was sat in the corner of the room, slumped in his chair, showing absolutely zero interest in proceedings. And the presentation was finished. And then Flav piped up and he said, "You Japanese, you like to bet." Big stereotype there, but that's Flav for you. And they responded to this. And he said, "I'll tell you what, if you sponsor us and we win the World Championship, the next year you double your sponsorship." And they all loved it and they shook hands on it. And of course, they won the World Championship in '94 and they doubled their sponsorship. And that was Flav. That was the difference he made. And it was, it was off the cuff. It was almost plain rude, really, by the sounds of the way he responded to it. But it was really effective. And there are examples of how he comes in and deals with negotiations. He's very human. And as I said earlier, he's funny and he's charismatic and people respond to him.
Yeah, and that's what they're betting on, isn't it, in terms of Alpine, in terms of him coming in.
One of the things I think that fits into that is that I'm not going to make comparisons to them as people, but he's basically going to be their Niki Lauda, isn't he? Isn't that what they're hoping he will bring to the table? And the reason I thought of that is because as you were telling that story, Damien, I was reminded of a Lauda-esque story like that. I can't remember the specifics of it, but it relates to basically a dinner with a big sponsor, basically that Lauda had no interest in going to, and then eventually basically was forced into attending, and then Lauda charmed the pants off everybody that was basically in the room, and ends up playing like this almost out of reluctance, plays this super key part in a non-competitive, commercial element of the team, as well as being linked to all these other things. And I just see Briatore being kind of envisaged as, which is one of the reasons why I think it's not impossible that it's, a suggestion from a Wolf type. Wolf has seen firsthand the benefit that kind of role with the right person in it can bring to a team. And if Briatore can do that, then it will be significant for Alpine, because as I was saying before, they've been rudderless for so long. They've had such a horrible clash of group politics and F1 ego on the team side, and you've never really got the impression that this team is like being managed completely in the same direction with the same end goal. It just felt like there were far too many kind of individual battles being fought all the time, and I would never hold someone like Otmar up as, you know, this altruistic saint of Formula One or something like that. But I do feel that was probably the best chance that team's had in the last few years of just having something racing focused. But they clearly never had that kind of board buy-in, because if they did, then I don't think Faman gets brought in as someone that Otmar ends up reporting to, because Otmar took that job thinking he would be in charge of the F1 team, and then a few months later, someone ends up basically taking a more senior position that he reports into. Whereas Briatore, given that he's someone that De Meo is hiring directly, that just feels like he's going to have De Meo's ear, isn't he? Whereas I don't really feel anyone competent or experienced has had that to the same degree. And if that can all be channeled into something productive, that's great. The one question I would have is, and maybe you could have asked this of Lauda, who clearly was very effective, is has Briatore been out of relevant stuff in modern F1 for too long to be as effective as he could be or needs to be? Or is he going to be so broad brushstrokes in that regard that, you know, the minutiae that he's missing out on by not being a team principal or team leader for X number of years won't matter so much?
I don't think so, to be honest. I think he'll be. I don't think the world's changed that much. I think maybe, given how, you know, obviously he was in a very politically incorrect age, and he was similarly as a character, so maybe he might say the wrong thing from time to time and get himself into some trouble. But I think in terms of the deals that he's going to do, he's the ultimate pragmatist, I think. Which actually this thinking from De Meo is also an incredibly pragmatic thing to do, is to bring someone in who is effective. I mean, he was very good at sort of understanding where the talent was in the team and protected them and looking after them. And there's another example which from the Benetton days, which I thought was really key to his input and his contribution to the ultimate success that team had, was when Pat Simmons and Rory Byrne and 13 senior engineers left Benetton to go to Reynard because they were disaffected with working with John Barnard. Instead of bellowing at them and saying, "You're never going to work in Formula One again," Flav was very calm and just said to them, "You never know, we might work together again one day, so you're good people, I wish you well." And they were quite surprised by that. And Pat said, "I've never thought that would happen." And then, about a year odd later, so it proved, they came back to the team. And Flav was pragmatic about that. He understood why they were going, and he also understood why rehiring them made a lot of sense.
Well, not just did they come back, but also they brought with them some of the aero ideas and knowledge that Reynard had been working on that was key to that sequence of Benettons that took them through the sort of the rise, sort of 93, 92, 93, 94 ultimately. So
yes,
again,
they were very clear to say that it was in their heads and not on pieces of paper, by the way.
Yes, that's very true. Well, you end up with this. One of my favourite footnotes of an F1 season is in 94, the championship winning car, or at least driver's championship winning car of Michael Schumacher, and the worst car of the season, the Pacific, from that perspective, had very similar routes. They were, in DNA, you could say, the same car. I think the Pacific was actual Reynard designs they acquired. I forget the exact way. Whereas the Benetton stuff was the ideas, and there was nothing wrong with the way they used those ideas or anything. It was all absolutely above board. But yeah, it's just one of those curiosities. I'll just throw in, because there's this question of what's Briatore done in Formula One. We will not know a fraction of the things that he's been involved in, because he is involved in so much. He is a deal maker. And so I think he'll be pretty current in terms of F1. It's not like he's come in from the cold or anything. But there's a question from the Race Members Club from Jacobus VDL, who said, the report on Briatore's appointment mentioned he'd been doing some work for F1. What was the nature of that work and who was he engaged by? Which it's pertinent to answer now, which I'll do. But yeah, as I understand it, Stefano Domenicali brought him in. And one of the recent things was that MSC Cruises deal. I've heard the number 60 million attached to that. Apparently that came in through Briatore. He was instrumental in things like the Azerbaijan Grand Prix happening. And he's got business connections all over. So this has been continuous. So his role with F1 was sort of, I don't know whether he ever had an official title or anything, but it was a similar sort of role in that he was bringing deals, doing that kind of thing, and that will mean he'll be a useful ally in terms of the formulation of the new Concord Agreement as well, because he's probably already up to speed on that, and Alpine and Renault will know that he knows what F1's objectives are in it, and will probably be motivated partly to help Alpine for them with what F1 want. But what Briatore is very good at is he's very good at finding the middle ground there and doing a deal that will satisfy F1 as a whole, or F1 the entity, and also the team. So that's what it's all about.
One thing that we haven't got into too much detail on in terms of what he'll bring is on the driver's side, because they're in another self-inflicted awkward moment on the drivers where, to everybody's great surprise, the Pierre Gasly-Esteban Ocon experiment hasn't worked, and they've now already confirmed that Ocon's out at the end of the year, despite Gasly not being 100% signed and sealed for 25 onwards, and other teams being a lot more advanced than Alpine is in terms of negotiations. And we've known for months that they've been at the table with Sainz in that fight for Carlos Sainz, who is obviously by a long way the best free agent at the moment. And it sounds like there's maybe been a kind of re-escalation of their interest, but they've been having the Sainz's and his, whether it's Sainz himself or just his representatives, have been having conversations directly with Luca Di Maio for weeks. I remember in Monaco being told about the conversations that have been going on there, and kind of assurances that they'd had for 26 and onwards about confidence in the project and blah blah blah. The Briatore's emergence, which would obviously have come behind the scenes a lot earlier than it was made public, so he could have been there for 2 or 3 weeks doing a few conversations and the like. I don't think that's going to single-handedly change things, but from an Alpine perspective, that is not a bad person to have in your corner if you're just trying to find ways to just swing that situation back towards you a little bit and turn what looked like a 2-horse race for Sainz between Williams and Audi into a 3-horse race. Briatore is a pretty good weapon for that, and even if it's not Sainz, he is someone that might be able to just convince 1 or 2 other drivers to take them seriously. Alternatively, I think he's had links to Alpine Junior Jack Doohan, so maybe his decision will just be we should put Doohan in the car.
Yeah, I agree with you, Scott. I think if he manages to get Sainz on the books, then he's almost justified the appointment there and then. But strangely, I think one thing that Flav, he didn't always make good decisions, and actually on drivers, he made a lot of bad decisions back in the day of Benetton. They chewed through an awful lot of good drivers, basically because they weren't Michael Schumacher, and he hired Gerhard Berger and Jean Alesi basically out of anger that Ferrari had taken Michael, and he wanted their drivers back in revenge, and then saddled the team with 2 huge salaries, which the money of which could have been better spent elsewhere.
It's a great move, isn't it? It's we're going to take the ones you don't want in revenge. That'll learn you. Yeah,
exactly. So I think actually on the driver front, that's probably where you could say he made his biggest errors over time. And there's a string of drivers who will report how damaging he was. Johnny Herbert, I know, still doesn't have an awful lot of time for Flavio Briatore for understandable reasons. So, but getting back to Scott's point, I think someone like Sainz might just be persuaded by Flav, because Flav, again, he makes an argument, and he's very convincing, and he will put forward a deal to Sainz which will make him stop and think, and it might be the sort of thing that almost in a couple of days everything could turn. And he'll justify his position there and then.
It's also not just about what he can do to sell the team. It's also what he and his appointment represent for that project, because the Sainzes have been really keen not to discount Alpine because it's a works team. But as I said before, the fact that it's been rudderless, the fact that it's had this constant uncertainty around it, and it's been underperforming this year, that has just counted against it so much. But Briatore, not just in, so, what he can say, how he can charm them, what kind of offer, maybe he can, get them a little bit, a slightly better offer or whatever it is. He can also be that kind of, it's a strange situation when Flavio is the voice of reason and the symbol of sanity in a team. But if he can be that kind of totem for, we are taking this really seriously. We're going to do everything we can to find success. We're bringing in as much experience as possible, and this is our blueprint now for the next few years, and this is what Flavio is going to be working on. That in itself could have a lot of value, because on paper, I actually think it should be a no-brainer for Sainz to choose the Renault Works team of his options at the moment, because it's in theory got no lower ceiling than the Audi Works team, because it's a Works team. Okay, it started the year terribly, but its recent form is actually better than that of Sauber and Williams. And it has the better sort of recent history as a team. But all of this other stuff around the off-track, and then obviously the on-track decline this year, counted against it. But it's just not impossible that Briatore element just helps, in addition to some on-track improvement, which we've seen in recent races, just turn the tide a little. Plus, if he is really good on that commercial stuff, then I think Sainz has at least one or two deals that tend to be quite neatly tied to him, don't they? That from a commercial side, that team would greatly benefit from. So if that is the case, I can imagine Flavio being right in there.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing he does, isn't it? And that's why it's such an interesting thing, because I've got this sort of kind of clear position that I completely agree with the point that it makes perfect sense in terms of the skill set he brings. It's just that history and the past conduct that's a problem. But you can see the decision they've made here. They have, as Famin has said, we're not worried about the past. It's about what they can do for us.
And on this point about Flav not being worried what anyone thinks, the other thing to mention is that he is completely unsentimental about his past with this team, and going way beyond Crashgate, going back to the Benetton days. That's all ancient history for him. And I asked him when I interviewed him for the book that what was you must be proud. You must be proud of what you achieved at Benetton. And he batted that away. He wasn't interested in that. He said the thing that he was most proud of was after he'd split with Benetton with a degree of acrimony and took a load of money out of the team because he had a share in the team, he formed Supertech, recognising there was going to be a shortfall of engines in Formula One, convinced Renault to allow him to carry on supplying these engines as a customer engine, and then sold them back to a bunch of teams, including Benetton, for 17 million a year. And that's what he was proud of. What a great bit of business, And that's the thing that he says is in his words, the miracle of his time in Formula One that people forget. And that's also part of the interesting thing about him being rehiring by the team. He won't even consider the problems that we're pointing out. There's a job to be done, and he can see a way of making a difference, I think.
So does Briatore have any fingers in other engine pies at the moment that Renault will suddenly become a customer of in 2026? Is Briatore going to supply his own engines?
Do you know, I wouldn't put it past him.
Exactly. You can't count anything out. I mean, he is a deal maker of the old school, and there's areas and there's some teams, and even Form itself sometimes haven't got quite enough of those sorts of deal makers. So, yeah, again, we've gone through so many reasons why the appointment makes sense. So that's what makes this such an interesting one. And increasingly, I mean, that's going to be what it's decided on. This is Formula One, isn't it? It's all about performance. So Alpine will probably look at it and think, well, we've got over the hump of the negativity, and now it's going to be about what Briatore actually contributes.
This episode is brought to you by Trojan Condoms. Experience more with Trojan Bearskin Raw, America's thinnest latex condom among leading brands. Enjoy triple-tested Trojan quality with a natural feel for your most thrilling adventure yet. Trojan Raw is also available in non-latex, designed to increase body heat transfer between partners. Trojan Bearskin Raw. Let's go. Tap the banner to buy now.
This episode is brought to you by Skinny Pop Popcorn. Perfectly popped, endlessly delicious. Oh, so light and crunchy. Skinny Pop Original Popcorn is the snack you've been searching for. Made with just 3 simple ingredients: popcorn kernels, sunflower oil, and salt. Snacking never felt or tasted so good. Perfectly popped, endlessly delicious. Give yourself permission to snack and pick up Skinny Pop Original Popcorn today.
Awaken your senses with a curiously refreshing Hendrick's Cucumber Lemonade.
Curious how?
Cue the aroma.
Marvelous.
Cue the taste.
Magnificent.
Cue the cucumber.
That's the refreshing secret.
Hendrick's is uncommonly crafted with cucumbers, roses, artistry, and imagination. Other gins are ordinary, but Hendrick's is
Refreshingly curious.
Discover Hendrick's Gin cocktail recipes at hendricksgin.com. Please drink the unusual responsibly. Hendrick's Gin, 44% alcohol by volume. Bottled and imported by William Grant & Sons, New York, New York. Copyright 2024.
Right, Scott, there's been a lot of paddock rumour about this notion Alpine could voluntarily discontinue its own engine programme and become a customer. It's very much contrary to the direction of travel an ambitious team would have. So how seriously should we take this possibility?
Yeah, we've referenced it a couple of times now in this podcast between us. I think we should take it seriously as something that has at least been considered and might even still be actively being considered. Publicly, the team's position is that it remains confident in its ambitious targets for 2026 and feels that it is an attractive proposition and in a good place as one of the works teams for the new rules, which are car and engine, and in theory that should convey quite a significant advantage. But whatever advantage it does convey, Renault has been almost uniquely adept at throwing away over the last near decade now. It just has repeatedly made a mockery of its own works team status, with the exception of 1 or 2 peaks. The concern would be that it has also been consistently behind in the hybrid era. A set of rules that it blundered so badly at the start that it managed to, in one fell swoop, alienate the team that it had just won 4 consecutive titles with as a customer. And obviously that was complicated by the re-emergence of Renault as a works team in that period and the extent of the Red Bull mockery and criticism at times. But
they did when they did that deal to continue to use Renault engines because they had no alternative, and they had to be badged. I think it had to be badged. They couldn't call them Renaults, but there was a point
Infinity, wasn't it?
Well, no, they had them as
Tag Heuer.
yeah. But
there was a wristwatch.
There was a point where
right.
all this had been done, and one of the agreements was that there was some huge fine if there was criticisms of the upgrade. I don't know, it's like $100,000 or something stupid. And then, of course, about the first opportunity, Daniel Ricciardo was a bit negative about an upgrade, and so it sort of piled in. That's always one of my favourite things of exemplifying how bad that deal got. It kind of got you can continue to pay us for our engines, but these are the conditions, and we'd rather you didn't call them that.
Exactly. And so you've basically had a situation now for a decade, because it's obviously 10 years since this engine rule set began. They're still not caught up. They still have an engine power deficit now. They again, and this is, I mentioned optics right at the very start, and Renault's obsession, as I understand it, Renault's obsession with optics is such that when Otmar went to bat last year trying to... Do you remember there was the talk of that dispensation for them to improve their engine because of the deficit they had? Otmar, as I understand it, basically had to really kind of go rogue on trying to force that topic into existence because Renault really didn't like it, whether that was because it was effectively an admission that they were behind, whether because they didn't like the idea of them having to get a leg up or anything like that. And other people senior people on the team side couldn't believe that there was this opposition effectively to doing something that is part and parcel of F1. You know, these situations or these possibilities exist precisely for this reason. If a manufacturer or a team is struggling, you do everything you can to get yourself out of that. And I don't think it's a coincidence that very soon after Otmar left, this topic died. It just was not a thing anymore, and Renault hasn't tried to revive it. So just as a works engine, it's just been all over the place in the hybrid era. So I can understand I can understand why they'd want to at least explore whether this is the most cost-effective, successful way of going about things long-term. But it's a big admission of failure. It's quite embarrassing if they go down that route. And what does it say about Renault? You know, if you're in F1 primarily for marketing reasons, and okay, the bar for what you have to clear to get something out of F1 for Alpine is a lot lower than for Renault as a brand. But if you're basically admitting to the entire world that you can't build an engine as well as Mercedes, Ferrari, Honda, Audi, and a drinks company, then that's the opposite of a marketing strategy, isn't it? That's an implosion of your credibility.
Well, one thing I did wonder about this is putting together the appointment of Briatore, which I still think is bad for the Renault brand and should have prevented it happening. The one thing that did make sense, combined with this possible engine thing, is that it's sort of a wind down and sale. Because if you wanted to sell your Formula One team, Briatore is the perfect person to do it. He'll probably get you twice as much as anyone else would. That's just what he does. And it's much easier to sell off if you've disconnected it from the Renault engine side. And you could even, if you wanted it to. I mean, I'm not an automotive journalist. I don't get the impression that the Alpine car brand is a roaring success in terms of its growth. I know it's small and they're trying to build it up, having revived it. But you could sell off the team and this little car company for some vast profit, and Briatore would be very good at that. They've said internally, they've said publicly, it's not for sale. But I do wonder.
My colleague at Autocar, Steve Cropley, who is an automotive journalist rather than a racing person, he interviewed De Meo recently, and he sent me the tape to listen to. And when he got onto the F1 team, he couldn't have been more explicit. He actually said to Steve, "Write this down. This team is not for sale." You know, and he was very vociferous that they're not going to give up. Now, he didn't mention anything about becoming a customer team and buying engines, but I agree with Scott. Basically, what's the point if they're going to do that? And yes, and I agree with you, Ed, that Briatore would be the ideal person to negotiate and broker the sale of a team. But even if Renault are losing and are doing badly, is there more to lose by not being in Formula One now than there ever used to be? Given that with the budget cap and with the whole way that it's been restructured and with the new Concord agreement, it's no longer bad business to be in Formula One. It's good business from a financial point of view, and that yes, it's all about marketing, but if they're out of the game, as they have been in previous times and have come back in, it's going to be a lot harder to come back in now. So maybe Renault can't afford not to be part of Formula One.
Yeah, it's possible.
It's got to be a horrible time to be a manufacturer that seems to think it needs to have a Works F1 team, but has no idea what to do with that Works F1 team, which is just, I think we've described it as kind of a half-baked F1 team before, a Works team before. I remember a Cyril Abiteboul interview quite early in the revival of the Works team where he said the intention was to beat the top teams with 85% of their funding and human resources. Just colossally in a way it's ambitious, but it's so unambitious. It's ambitious in that there isn't that commitment. You know, that's not coming from a place of arrogance insofar as they've looked at all the other teams and gone, no, they're being really wasteful. We can definitely do it like this. That is them saying, we're not doing that. We refuse to put in what this requires based on that level. So you will do it with this amount of money. And I think even in the times where that team has underachieved, as it has this season so badly, so absolutely what Renault has put in deserves more than what Alpine's done with it for this year. But they've also gone through an unprecedented overhaul in the last couple of years, and this level of instability that I've not seen in modern F1 in terms of how tumultuous it's been. I just don't think Renault has a clue what the investment it's put in actually deserves in Formula One. I feel like they've put in the 5th or 6th sort of highest amount of investment, but they're genuinely expecting to get like a top 2 or top 3 team out of it, which I just find baffling. And this kind of fits into that. This idea of just like, oh, could we just could we be a works team that's not really a works team? Could we own the team and call the team this name, but then use someone else's engine? It works from a commercial point of view. Like, I'm sure the return on investment would go up massively if they did it this way. But that's just a really underwhelming and uncompetitive and unambitious existence, isn't it? And I'm sure they don't care. If that means that they did better than they did now, they probably wouldn't care. But I don't think that should be celebrated or encouraged. It's only one step removed from the whole Sauber Alfa Romeo situation, really. So I guess the question is whether or not, if they're not going to sell entirely, would they be willing to sell like a bigger stake or more of it? And if that's the case, have there been worse team names in recent years than Alpine, Andretti, Cadillac? It kind of rolls off the tongue.
From what I understand, Andretti are not interested in buying Alpine. Could change. And I would have to say, if you wanted to try and persuade an entity that doesn't want to buy another entity to do it again, Flavio Briatore could be quite a good person to do that. Yes. So it's interesting from that perspective. But yeah, Renault corporately's involvement in Formula One has been very, very checkered, let's say, in terms of all sorts of things. And you could argue that it was the uncertainty of commitment that created the conditions for Singapore 2008 to happen in the first place, given the desperation to get a win to try and ensure the team continued. But I'm sure there's going to be things to come. And we should remember, when it comes also to the team ownership, 24% of it is already owned by a US consortium. A US consortium that apparently have been a little bit concerned with things that are going on there. I wouldn't be surprised if Briatore has partly been brought in to try and help work with them, because when that was announced, there was all sorts of talk about things that could be done there commercially and extending the brand and all these things that we haven't yet really seen much evidence of happening. Now, as a final point, it's worth it just talking about the on-track stuff, Damien, because Alpine's actually up to 7th in the Constructors' Championship. So has that improvement surprised you?
No, not really. I mean, they started terribly. Obviously, they were in a terrible state at the start of the season. But this is still a very experienced, well-funded Formula One team that has dug itself out of the hole to an extent. But basically, it's only now achieving the bare minimum of what we'd expect from such a team. Obviously, before it was achieving way below that. So I'd say this is kind of where the base point, really, of where this team should be. So I'm not surprised they've improved to the extent they have. The real test is whether they can improve further. I mean, they've got a big gap now to close down to RB ahead of them, which I would think is probably going to be beyond them. There's still a lot of races still to go, so maybe it can happen. But this is probably as good as it's going to get. But, I guess you have to wonder, will Gasly and Ocon, two very good drivers, have any hope of battling for more than 9th and 10th this year?
Yeah, they've been very 9th and 10th recently, actually. 9th and 10th in the last two Grand Prix. And Gasly, of course, was 10th at Monaco. They'd probably been 10th and 11th if Esteban Ocon hadn't launched his move. But, well, it's worth remembering, though, Scott, isn't it, that there's still quality people at Enstone. And this is the thing. Again, the reason why we've got Captain Enstone, Damien Smith, here to just remind us there is something about this team. And that's why it's so infuriating that it's been so all over the shop. Because when Renault bought it, we sort of thought, yeah, this is going to be good again. And this team that sort of waxes and wanes in Formula One history, it's risen to the top a couple of times and then inevitably fallen back. And you sort of thought this was a rise to a third one, because there is quality there. It feels like a team that just hasn't been allowed to get on with it without all sorts of management and ownership shenanigans.
Yeah, you'd love to know what it is that is also instilled the kind of inconsistency year to year. Because when I look at how Renault has managed this and the amount of turbulence that there has been from a management level, but also a driver level as well, if you look at, let's say, 2017 onwards, when it starts the season with Hülkenberg and Palmer, and then by comparison, Mercedes is what Hamilton and Bottas, and Verstappen is Red Bull is Verstappen and Ricciardo. Since then, that Renault lineup has just constantly changed and basically constantly got weaker. Whereas others have either had, one spearhead that has stayed and sort of become that team, as I've said it a few times, like their franchise driver. And there's been a small amount of evolution, but nothing dramatic. That period from 16-17 to now, I understand why the team hasn't achieved what it set out to achieve. I understand why it struggled. What I still can't get my head around is the year-to-year fluctuations. Let's take this rule set as an example. There has been a general trend of decline, but it's been bafflingly volatile over the last 3 or 4 years. You know, I know that it was special circumstances, but it won a race in 21. It was consistently very good in 22, but it just seems to lose its way. And we've seen a few times it sort of rises to this relative peak of being fourth best and then declines instantly. It doesn't even have like stagnation. It just declines straight away. And I'm genuinely baffled by that. I can't understand it. And we're talking now about, you know, this little run of point scoring that they've been on. And I agree with Damien. I'm not surprised that there's been this kind of in-season improvement because of, first of all, the opportunity that they had, but also the size and competency of the team that they should have recovered. But we're still looking at a really modest improvement by the end of the year. They're going to be 6th or 7th in the championship. And I know that last year set an unrealistic target, but look at McLaren's in-season turnaround last season. From about 17 points after 8 races or something like that to being a regular podium finisher by the end of the year. And I will not revise history and pretend that Edd and I were on this podcast saying, oh, no, don't worry, like McLaren have got this sorted. The potential they've got, they'll be second best to Red Bull on the high-speed tracks by the end of the season. We never said that. But as the season went on, you started to believe actually that there's just an understanding here. There's a trajectory here that you can buy into. And I don't get that from Alpine at all. The fact that they've just had this better weekend at Barcelona, which has come from a time where they don't expect to have any more upgrades and seems to just be because the track just happened to suit them a bit better, kind of says everything to me about where they've been performance-wise the last couple of years. It's just that this is where they are, isn't it? It's between being 5th best and sort of 2nd or 3rd slowest. That's kind of their, I don't want to say sweet spot because it's not a very sweet spot, but that just seems to be the little part of the grid that they just seem destined to float around in.
Let's get a final verdict from you, Damien. Do you think that Briatore's return is going to set this team back on track? Is it going to be like last time round where his arrival was pretty key to the team being able to ramp up from just being a sort of a good occasional winner that was sort of biting at the heels of the top teams to actually really become one?
Well, there's no silver bullet, and he's certainly not that person, I don't think. He's not Adrian Newey. He's not going to change the team in that sense. But I think he'll make a significant contribution and to reshaping whatever form this team takes in the future, whether it's as Alpine as we know it, or in partnership with another team, or how it's structured and how it's powered, and even to who drives it. He will make a significant contribution. And I agree with everything about how the optics are bad and that it's a very odd signing on the face of it, but he will make a difference. And I think that's why he's been employed. Yeah,
it's one of those things. They shouldn't really have done it, but you can see all the arguments for it if you disregard that one thing. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. I'm sure we are going to see some changes down the line. Very much, Faman's the operational man. Briatore's the bigger picture, strategic deal-making man. Let's see how that works. Well, thanks very much to Scott and also to Damien Smith. Remember to buy Damien's book. It is very good. I would absolutely recommend it. It's Benetton, Rebels of Formula One, if I've got the title right. I have bought a copy myself as well. So I do speak from a position of having read it. It's well worth a look. And there's loads in there about Briatore's involvement with the team and how it went from being a good team to a great team, the kind of great team that could come. Again, check out our website, have a look at our YouTube channel as well. Loads of other podcasts we produce as well, including Bring Back V10s. That's in its 10th season at the moment. Right, well, we're now heading to Austria, so stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.
The Athletic.